In this video, I want to spend a few moments talking about how aperture affects your depth of field. I've touched on it in a couple different videos. I had a video that went up a few days ago about why, one of the benefits of owning a prime and the amount of light that it can let in, because primes often offer very large maximum apertures. But let's talk a little bit more and illustrate how the apertures or changing of apertures affects your depth of field. So I'm shooting right now with this camera and I have a 51.4 on and I'm shooting at 51.4, and notice that I should be in pretty good focus. I'm using this little DSLR controller on the Nexus 7 to control the settings on the camera as I'm talking to you all. And I touch my face to make sure I'm in focus and I'm not moving forward or backward. If I put my hand up next to my face, one, we're suffering from some brightness problems. Let me actually take the shutter speed. There we go. Does that look a little better? I think it does. So now my hand is still pretty bright, but it should be in focus right here. And as it moves forward, and maybe I'll crop this out and make it bigger too, it should get out of focus fairly quickly until it's quite out of focus. And of course, if I move it back. So what you're seeing is my hand moving. Right in this area is my area of focus. And in front of that or behind that, it's not in focus. I'm shooting with a very large maximum aperture right now, 1.4. Let's change that maximum aperture. Let's take it to something like, actually before I do, we'll just take a gander at the images on the wall behind me and kind of make note of how out of focus that they are. And those things are what, about 2 feet behind me, not too far, maybe even 18 inches. So I'm going to change. I'm going to go from 1.4 to 2.8. And the image is going to get a lot darker, so I need to adjust my shutter speed to match and keep the same, roughly, exposure. So now, watching those images in the background, they should be a little bit more in focus, and I should have a little bit more room to move my hand before it comes out of focus. Not terribly a scientific test here. We'll switch this around in a minute and do it with a little ruler and things of that sort. Let's go to something extreme like 5.6. We're going to lose a lot of light because we've narrowed that aperture down. I'm looking into the lens right now and I can see the hole is smaller. So you can do this as well with your own settings, especially with the T4i or the D5200. You can flip that screen around and change your aperture settings as you're looking at it. What do I need to do? Oh yes, slow my shutter speed down so that you can still see me. And they're starting to look in focus. And my hand, I can move it a good bit further forward. I'm just watching on the screen as I do so I can see what you all are seeing. And further back, and it stays in focus. Let's go to even more extreme. Let's go to F10. It's going to get quite dark. That hole now is about the size, and it all is relative to the lens, but the hole at F10 is, oh, I went way too high. That's still too high. That's close enough. The hole is about that big, the hole in the lens now that is created by the aperture blades closing and opening. When we first started this f1.4, I couldn't even see the aperture blades. They basically were against the edges of the lens, and now they're closed down quite a bit. So pretty sharp focus back here. I can put my hand all the way back there. It's still in focus. I can move it quite a bit forward. It gets too bright because we got bright light coming in right through the center there. But it's still in focus as well. So just a quick bit. Now I'm going to flip this around and maybe just put some models down and talk a little bit more and show it on a ruler in focus. But that is how aperture affects your depth of field. The smaller the number, the larger the opening, the shallower your depth of field. This is great when you want to take portrait pictures, and many of you have seen this, and not just portrait pictures, but a lot of nice pictures where you want to isolate your subject. And really blur the background, and that's when you get that nice bokeh effect. And the more aperture blades you have, the smoother those kind of circles or shapes of light are in the background. And that's one of the things you get with a more expensive lens, is more aperture blades usually. And of course, it is a way to control the amount of light that is entering into your camera. And then there are times where you want to make sure everything is in focus when you're taking a nice scenic picture or a landscape picture. Many times you're stopping your aperture way down to something like f10 or f11 and shooting at that. So okay, let's do some tests on the ruler now and see how that looks. Okay, a little bit more of a controlled setting here, and just a few more samples of how aperture affects your depth of field. A little still life here, Jar Jar sitting on a can of cat food, sloped ruler leading to some dried flowers. I'm shooting with a T4i with a 50-1.4 on in aperture priority mode. And right now I'm at 1.4. And let's say I hadn't focused it yet. Let's show focusing real quick. So I have back button focusing set up. I can use back button focusing to get that in focus, or I can manually focus by pressing the little magnifying button down here in the bottom right corner. Pressing it once will activate it, pressing it again will move you to 5x zoom, and one more time to 10x zoom. And now we have and you can then move it around. Let's get his eyes in sharp focus, and now I can just manually focus until I think they're in sharp focus. And I am turning it a millimeter, very, very little amount, because we're shooting at 1.4. That depth of field is very shallow. Let's take a picture and look at that for a minute. All right, here's our picture. Now, let's start to rotate our dial. Because I'm in aperture priority, the camera is taking care of the shutter speed, so I don't need to make any changes to that. ISO I have set on 200, and it's just sitting there and it's just fine. Now, if you're really paying attention, you notice that we're way up now, and it doesn't really look any different on live view. Let me take a picture. Now it's a 1/20th of a shutter speed, so shutter speed's getting a bit slower. Now, the image, however, looks a good bit different. Everything here, except for the very back wall, is in focus. And if we go back one real quick, we can see quite a difference from, and let's remember what we were shooting at, f13, I just pressed info button, and f1.4. But how come in live view you can't see the change? Live view always has the aperture open as wide as possible to let in as much light to help the camera focus and to show you what's going on. You have to use that little button on the side, and it's very small and it's hard to find. It's in the front right corner if you're looking at the camera, at the front of the camera, and it's called the depth of field preview button. When you hold that button down, it snaps the aperture. I shouldn't use snap because that sounds like shutter. It moves the aperture to the correct location for your f-stop. So if you have it set at f13, it moves the aperture blades down and makes the opening appropriate for f13. So let's go back a little bit. I'm going to go back down and look at something like 5.6 or 5. And I'm going to take a picture again. Again, because I have back button focusing on, it doesn't try to refocus for each of these pictures, which I find very nice. I could, of course, switch to manual focus, but it's nice sometimes to be able to hit this when you want it to focus and just hit the shutter when you don't. I have a video up about that. If I've been smart, I've put a little link for you to that video as well. All right, so just a couple more samples. How aperture affects your depth of field. If you have any questions about this, just let me know. Thanks so much for watching. Come over to the Facebook, give it a like. That's a nice way to say thank you to me for making these videos. I love the community that's being built there, and there's a great group of folks. And you might miss a tip, a trick, or a giveaway if you're not following that page.